Let's bow our heads for a brief word of prayer, please. Father, we ask your presence, your Spirit. We ask your infilling, for there's nothing worse than to have you present but not in our hearts. We pray that you will be with us, that you will direct in all that is done and said here, and all the thoughts that are taken from this meeting, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, we are dealing with serious topics this weekend. I trust you've come to grips with that already. But I want to begin with something of a cautionary note, I guess. These are serious problems, and they do require, there's a crying need for a response, for something, to resolve these problems, to deal with these problems. At the same time, there is an aspect that I just want to highlight very briefly at the beginning of this talk. We need to be charitable in our estimation of those who may not jump into this particular battle as quickly as we may think they should. It's natural to not want to. Notice this statement here. A copy of Living Temple was sent me, this is Ellen White writing, of course, but it remained in my library unread. From the light given me by the Lord, I knew that some of the sentiments advocated in the book did not bear the endorsement of God, and that they were a snare that the enemy had prepared for the last days. So when Ellen White knows that there's a problem in the book, what do you think her first, what's her first reaction? I thought this would surely be discerned, and that it would not be necessary for me to say anything about it. She was actually, by nature, it seems, kind of a shy person. She was an introvert. She didn't like being out there. I hesitated and delayed about the sending out of that which the Spirit of the Lord impelled me to write. I did not want to be compelled to present the misleading influence of these sophistries, but in the providence of God, the errors that have been coming in must be met. I have tried to keep silent. But as I have seen Dr. Kellogg exercising his subtle influence over the men who do not seem to realize that he is wrong, who do not understand the work that Satan is carrying on through him, I am constrained to speak. It took constraint before she got into this thing, right? I am now to say to our brethren, cut loose, take your stand decidedly if you would save your souls. Take your position for truth and righteousness. Now, I bring this up for just a couple of reasons. Number one, I didn't want to get involved in this stuff. This is not my cup of tea. Come on. I don't like this any more than Ellen White did, right? And the same may be true of a lot of other people. And not all of them may be called to address this issue. Does that make sense? You with me on that? Now, they all have to take a position on it. They all have to, find the truth and relate to it, but they may not be called to address it. So, just because somebody doesn't jump into the whole thing with, all guns blazing or something, that may not be what they're called to do. We can afford to be charitable. We don't need to make enemies out of someone who might be an ally. My only reason for getting involved in this was to bring a historical perspective to the discussion. I just really believe in that whole those who fail to learn from history thing, And if there is any possibility, even the most remote possibility, that what we're talking about here is the omega of apostasy, to fail to learn the lessons from the Alpha is utter stupidity. We can't do that. And so that's how I got into it, and that's the angle I look at it from. I just kind of like Adventist history, and that's the way I come at it. So that may be obvious. In all of this, in dealing with all this, we unfortunately are at risk of losing sight of the highest lesson of them all from the Alpha experience. In my opinion, the highest lesson of them all. It's the same lesson, it's the greatest lesson that Jesus came to earth to teach us. It goes like this: love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself, is not puffed up, does not behave rudely, does not seek its own, is not provoked, thinks no evil, does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. And if we don't have that, we're not much, as I recall the verse. We're not much, okay? Ellen White tried for years to save Dr. Kellogg. She wrote him letter after letter, pleading, instructing, supporting where she could. And she defended him in every way that she could. This is ironic, and it may surprise you, but her strongest defense of Kellogg, you might have a different opinion, but basically the strongest defense of Kellogg that I believe she ever gave was at the 1903 General Conference session in public, 1 year after he had written Living Temple. She was defending a pantheist. She was not defending pantheism. If we can't separate the people from the issues, we've got issues. So that's important. Sadly, Kellogg suffered a great deal from his brethren who were not as gifted or skilled in this area as Ellen White was. In that 1903 General Conference, she stood up and she addressed the ministers and says, "Some of you have made war upon him. You made his work twice as hard as it should have been. You tried to tear him down to build yourselves up. And that's why he's where he is today." It's always, you can go through history, it's always the attacks from our own brethren that take down the head people. Jones, Wagner, Kellogg. James White came very close to throwing in the towel at one point because his brethren weren't sympathetic. There is a reason the Bible says Jesus came unto his own and his own received him not. That's the hardest test. We can't afford to be on the wrong side of that issue. Every soul is a soul to be saved. Those who are believing error are souls to be saved. Those who are teaching error are souls to be saved. If we don't have that, we don't have much. But there is a time to speak. There is a time to speak. So as I got into the topic and some of these things, I became more and more concerned, and I came to conclude that this counsel is applicable just as much today as it was in Ellen White's day. She said, "The sentiments in Living Temple regarding the personality of God have been received even by men who have had a long experience in the truth. When such men consent to eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, we are no longer to regard the subject as a matter to be treated with the greatest delicacy." There's a time to take off the gloves. "That those whom we thought sound in the faith should have failed to discern the specious, deadly influence of this science of evil should alarm us as nothing else has alarmed us. It is something that cannot be treated as a small matter that men who have had so much light and such clear evidence as to the genuineness of the truth we hold should become unsettled and led to accept spiritualistic theories regarding the personality of God. This is not a small matter. The issues we're dealing with are not a small matter. They have grown, and they have grown for decades. I'm just going to cite two particular circumstances, two particular situations that, for various reasons, as I was studying, these were the two that just kind of choked me up. They said, it's like, what in the world? Why could that be? How could that be? So, just two little quickies. First thing is a set of Bible studies published by the North American Division Church Resource Center. They're known as the I Follow Discipleship Resource Materials. This was a huge project. More than 100 Bible studies are included in the original release. Each unit has a presenter's guide, handouts for participants, discussion questions for groups, learning activities, and a PowerPoint presentation. 100 sets of 5 different things or something like that. This is a big operation, okay? One of the first things that raises concern is the selection of materials, both to document as cited as authority as they're going through the studies, and also in the recommended reading lists at the end of the studies. In both cases, there is a heavy tilt toward emergent authors. I'm not exactly comfortable with that. Here's some examples. Henry Nouwen, And if you don't know these names, let me just simply say that these are some of the most prominent of the emergent authors. These are the guys who are teaching them most clearly the mystical elements of the emergent church teaching, okay? Henry Nouwen, in the course of these Bible studies, is cited 14 times, has one book recommended, and his website's listed. N.T. Wright, 9 citations, 4 different books, recommended a total of 21 times, website listed. Brian McLaren, 6 citations, 5 different books, recommended a total of 24 times. Leonard Sweet, 4 citations, 1 book recommendation, website listed. Richard Foster, 3 citations, 2 different books, recommended a total of 16 times, website listed 5 times. Dallas Willard, 2 citations, 6 different books, recommended a total of 66 times. Must be great books. Now, in case you weren't quick enough with your math, that adds up to 175 recommendations for just these 6 authors. And there are a few others scattered around that just didn't make my short list, okay? One of those others is an interesting guy. His name is Eugene Peterson. The lessons refer to him as a, quotes, many years experienced Hebrew scholar. Oh, that's great. I believe in Hebrew scholarship. Somebody ought to have it. The lessons include a quotation from his Bible paraphrase. The title is The Message. I don't actually recommend that version of the... I don't recommend that book. I'm not sure I'm going to even call it a version of the Bible. I don't recommend his paraphrase, right? I don't think I would have included him as an authority in any sort of a Bible study at all. Why would I not? Well, for one reason, because he said this, quoting, "Well, why do people spend so much time studying the Bible? How much do you need to know? We invest all this time in understanding the text, which has a separate life of its own, and we think we're being more pious and spiritual when we're doing it, but it's all to be lived. It was given to us so we could live it, but most Christians know far more of the Bible than they're living. They should be studying it less, not more. You just need enough to pay attention to God." This is the extreme subjective element of the emergent church. You don't need anything that's concrete, solid, and actually says something clear, pat, blam that you can understand. All you need is this fuzzy connection so that you can talk to God and hear what He's telling you. I don't like that, personally. I have a problem with that. Well, let's go on. There are a couple of other significant terms that also show up frequently in the I Follow lessons. First one of these is silence. Why would you need to talk about silence in a set of Bible studies? 22 times we're talking about silence. But that's nothing. How about meditation? 138 times. That's a lot of emphasis on meditation for a set of Bible studies. Here's a quote from the studies. One essential to the Christian life, or something I suppose it is here, one essential is meditation. This refers to the mental practice of emptying the mind, quieting the chatter of my thoughts, and entering into mindfulness. Okay, right there, I have an issue. I'm sorry, I was an English teacher for too long. You can't say emptying the mind and mindfulness and use them as synonyms. Hello? I'm sorry, that's lying. Don't do that to me, okay? I don't buy that stuff, okay? If you're emptying your mind, it's mindlessness. Now, let's just be honest, we're going dumb, okay? I recommend doing it for 2 periods a day, about 20 minutes in the morning and again in the evening. I sit in an alert manner and concentrate on slowing my breathing. You got a problem with breathing? Why are we slowing our breathing? Because it's one of the fastest ways to drop into an alpha state in your meditation process. Talk to a Hindu. They've been slowing their breathing for a long time, however long. Distractions are noted and let go as I focus on inner quiet. Okay, it's nice. In these studies, the dependence on emergent writers was so blatant that it actually became a bit of an arguing point in the discussion following an article on the website of Spectrum magazine. And it's quite interesting because it's not some wild-eyed, rabid conservative who's arguing. It's somebody who just simply said, you can't really say what you're saying about these studies because it's obvious they come from this book. Anyhow, okay, let's move on. Different topic, different issue. Another interesting organization is called the Leadership Institute. I don't remember exactly how I ran into these guys. Now, bear in mind, I did all this sitting up in Canada, tapping on my little laptop computer here using Google. Okay, I did that partially because one of the favorite emergent authors likes to refer to this as being a Google world now. I said, okay, that's fine. Let's see if he's right. So all this stuff, everything I'm telling you right now, except for the history stuff, which I read from reasonable sources, everything else, I just got off my little laptop. It's not hard to find. But anyhow, somehow or other, I ran into this operation. I don't remember how. The Leadership Institute. It's actually a question of how I ever heard of them. We'll see that in a moment. But you go to the organization's website, and you can learn things like this. It's located in Orange, California, which is, I don't know, someplace down by Los Angeles? I don't know. Orange, down there somewhere. I don't know. It was founded in 1989 by L. Paul Jensen, who has served for the last 25 years as the Institute's director. Okay, a little continuity there. That's good. We're told that he is an ordained Adventist minister. Okay. He served on the staff of Campus Crusade for Christ, pioneered campus ministries, and trained campus chaplains for the Adventist Church for a total of 16 years before starting the Leadership Institute. 16 years from before 1989 takes you back to 73. This stuff's been around a while. Well, so Paul Jensen, what do we know about Brother Jensen? He was a graduate visiting student under N.T. Wright at Oxford University. That's a possible problem. He is now the adjunct assistant professor of leadership and Christian formation and spirituality in contemporary culture at Fuller Theological Seminary. That is a problem. So back to the Institute itself. A little more information, this time about the staff. Of the organization's 11 team members, 6 graduated with advanced degrees from Fuller. Very, very strong linkage between TLI and Fuller Seminary, okay? 4 have served as faculty members there. The other 5 team members have degrees or credentials from Pepperdine University, Denver Theological Seminary, the Graduate Theological Foundation, Azusa Pacific University, the Talbot School of Theology, and the Monastery of the Risen Christ. I'm not that familiar with most of these, to be honest. Only one of these, John Ciccarelli, I don't know how to pronounce it. He's the Azusa Pacific graduate. He's a Seventh-day Adventist. Their website says he is the senior pastor of the Adventist Church in Escondido. I don't know if that's still valid or not, but that's what their website says. One thing the website doesn't give us much information on at all is the Institute's working relationship with the Seventh-day Adventist Church. For that information, we can turn to a very helpful article which appeared some years ago in the publication Adventist Today. Now, this is a publication that I, credit where credit is due. I often find myself diverging from their theology, but in my experience with them thus far, I think they have fairly good literary ethics. They don't lie. They may slant things their own way, but they don't lie on factual matters, and so I respect that, and I think they're to be commended for that. So there was this article that showed up in their publication. The author was a Dr. Merle Whitney. He was identified at the time as the pastor of the Anaheim Seventh-day Adventist Church. According to this article, the Leadership Institute was set up by the administrators of the Southeastern California Conference in response to strong direction from the conference executive committee to reach and retain youth and young adults. Okay, so this would have been in 1989, and what Pastor Whitney is saying is that the executive committee says, hey, we're losing too many young people. Well, that's a problem. I can sympathize with the concern there. We're losing too many young people. You guys need to do something about it. Let's set something up. Let's get a program that will save our youth. Well, that's a good thing so far. Whitney says that very significant funding was provided in the conference budget beginning in 1993 and has continued each year since. Now, this was written in 2002, so 93 to 2002 is, just about 10 years worth of budget line. I have no idea what's happened since, but that's the information that I happen to have. Oops, wrong button. There we go. In time, the official name of the program run by the Leadership Institute became the Journey to Reach the Next Generations. And you can see the emphasis on reaching the youth there, okay? The Journey to Reach the Next Generations, but now it's just generally referred to as the Journey. So what do we know about the Journey? Did we lose one screen? We lost one screen. Okay. According to the article again from Pastor Whitney, 3 times each year, participants in the Journey meet for a 3-day retreat at Pine Springs Ranch, the Southeastern California Conference camp. He says, though, that the foundation of the Journey was the spiritual formation of the pastors involved in the process. The stated goal was the saving of the young people of the church, but the method by which this goal was to be reached was by the spiritual formation, or the tweaking, shall we say, of the spiritual experience of the pastors. He says, soon this became an important aspect of recruiting subsequent groups. Now, going on. Since 2006, the organization's public nonprofit filings have listed a Sandy Roberts of 11330 Pierce Street, Riverside, California, as one of the organization's directors. I didn't know who that was, but I did a little checking, and it turns out that that address there just happens to be the conference office of the Southeastern California Conference. And so Sandy Roberts, as near as I can tell, is in all probability the same individual more commonly referred to as Sandra Roberts, the recently elected president of that conference. So since 2006, she's been a member of the board of directors. It probably makes sense, from one perspective. If you're going to have a liaison between the conference committee and the organization over here, Sandra Roberts would make sense, because she earned a Doctor of Ministry degree with emphasis in spiritual formation from the Claremont School of Theology. So she would be better equipped to understand what they're doing over here, because they're into spiritual formation. She got special training in that, so she understands what they're doing. And that would make sense up to a certain level. There are a number of documents available on the website. And it's interesting, they seem particularly designed to introduce mystical practices to those unfamiliar with them, especially Protestants. One example reads, one gift to the church that has been little known among Protestants until recently is the prayer of Examen. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but this prayer was introduced to members of the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, by its founder, Ignatius of Loyola, who lived back in the 1500s, basically. It was a primary form of prayer for the society, which was founded as a missionary order. Well, that's good. Everybody likes missionaries. As a spiritual practice that can be done anytime, anywhere, it is especially accessible to mobile and busy people in the workplace, even as it was for the early Jesuits who went throughout the world as itinerant missionaries to establish evangelistic work and colleges. At the heart of this prayer was Ignatius' teaching to find God in all things. I'm sorry, that's the definition of pantheism. God in all things. That's a concern to me. The materials produced by the Leadership Institute contain repeated encouragement to adopt mystical methods of worship, how-to instruction, and frequent references to Lectio Divina. One document tells of a woman's experience while walking the path of a labyrinth, which is, a labyrinth is not a maze. A labyrinth is just a convoluted little trail. You ponder, toggle along type of thing and just let your mind go into neutral. It's a meditation aid is actually what it is. She tells of how God, and I put that in quotes because I'm not sure I buy that, but God spoke a series of 2-word phrases to her. Follow this sequence. I am, you are, we are, they are, everything is, I am. Okay. This appears to me to be nothing more than a flagrant example of this oneness with the universe. Everything is I am. The great Brahma or whatever, the goal of Hinduism is to lose all personality and personal consciousness and be blended into the great essence of the universe. This is not Christianity. This is not what I would want to be seeing taught to the pastors of the Southeastern California Conference. It's no coincidence that a participant would report an experience like that, because the materials from the Leadership Institute all lean that way. And much like the I Follow materials, they feature frequent references to and recommendations for books dealing with the more mystical aspects of the emergent church practices. Among the classical authors cited are Ignatius of Loyola, St. John of the Cross, Teresa of Avila, and Thomas à Kempis. These are all classic Catholic mystics from generations past, centuries past. Among the contemporary authors most frequently cited are Henry Nouwen, Thomas Merton, Dallas Willard, Eugene Peterson, and Paul Jensen's former professor, N.T. Wright. One particularly troubling name given as a resource is Sue Monk Kidd. Sue Monk Kidd is apparently quite a well-known author. I hadn't heard of her before. I guess I don't go to those shelves in the bookstore. But I did a little reading on her background. She started off as a Baptist, but that all changed. The process began with the reading of one book by Thomas Merton. From there, it was all, she would say, uphill, and I would perhaps disagree with that. She has since completely repudiated the Bible and Christianity. She now advocates a sort of Unitarian panentheistic goddess worship. Why would she be a needed component in a Christian training program? That's a puzzle to me. One thing that concerns me is the lack of transparency. This is probably the biggest thing that concerns me, the lack of transparency in regard to this program. The only public comment I could find from either the Southeastern California Conference or the Pacific Union Conference concerning the Leadership Institute, and I did a lot of Google searching to double-check this. The only thing I could find came in a description of the activities hosted by the conference summer camp. They said this: Pine Springs Ranch is privileged to host the Leadership Institute as they nurture the souls of many of the Southeastern California Conference's pastors through the ministry of The Journey, a program of spiritual formation and renewal for conference leaders. I suspect that many of the church members whose financial generosity has been used to provide the very significant funding that Pastor Whitney wrote about would probably be interested to know more about this particular program. But it's never been mentioned in the Pacific Union Recorder that I could find. This is the only place it ever showed up in the archives section of, I think it was the SECC website. I found it in the archives section. Pastor Whitney's article was written 12 years ago, so there may well have been changes in the working relationship between TLI and the conference in that time. I can't verify that one or the other. I confined myself to just searching on Google. I could have, I know it sounds kind of dumb, I could have called somebody up. I just call them up and said, hey, can I ask you a question? I was having fun with Google, so that's all I did. What I can say is that there apparently remains a working relationship of some sort. Early this year, 2014, TLI made this observation in the context of a, quote, proposal for the future of the journey in the Southeastern California Conference. They wrote, in November 2013, the Journey celebrated its 20th anniversary in the Southeastern Conference of Adventists. Parentheses here, Generation 1 had their first retreat in November 1993. They call classes generations. I don't know exactly why, but it's not, the class of such and such. It's Generation 1, 2, 3, 4. They're up to like 22 or 23 or something like that now. On the strength of 20 years of training nearly 125 pastors from the conference, we believe that there is an opportunity to significantly increase the scope and impact of the journey over the next few years. This raises questions in my mind. I'm not sure I want them to increase the scope and influence in the next few years. I'm not sure I wanted them to train 125 Adventist pastors. I'm not sure it's right to do that without letting the church membership know. I think that is a problem. But now, with all that as background, I want to get off of that and move to the stuff I love. What do we do about it? What's the answer? What's the solution to this stuff? Okay? Let's start with an illustration from the Spirit of Prophecy. Ellen White uses this wording quite frequently. She says, as in the natural world, do you know where it goes from there? So in the spiritual world, right. Nature is not God, but God uses nature to illustrate spiritual truth, right? So I'm suggesting that we can find some excellent advice in these words. Disease never comes without a cause. The way is prepared and disease invited by disregard of the laws of health. Another passage. Disease is an effort of nature to free the system from conditions that result from violation of the laws of health. In case of sickness, the cause should be ascertained. Unhealthful conditions should be changed, wrong habits corrected. Then nature is to be assisted in her effort to expel impurities and reestablish the right condition of the system. Okay, this is simple stuff, but everybody knows that we commonly mess this up. We treat symptoms and we either forget or just willingly neglect to deal with the underlying problems. But I believe the same is metaphorically true of our church's condition. There is an underlying problem which must be ascertained and addressed. Imagine for a moment that you are in a lifeboat adrift someplace in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. You are suffering from starvation because you've been there for a long time, and you're suffering from dehydration. You're nearly dead. Now imagine that a rough wave comes out of the blue someplace and knocks you overboard. You're floundering around in the water, and all of a sudden you see a great white shark coming your direction. You look around quickly and you see there's an oar that got knocked out of the boat too. You grab the oar, you fend off the shark, you manage to climb back in the boat, and now you can relax because life is good. Everything is fine. No, you're still starving and you're still dying of dehydration. Everything is not fine. Okay? That's where I think we're at. It's my opinion that the emergent church heresies are basically like the shark. Even if we fight them off, we still have issues. We need to figure out what to do to get hold of some food, water, and solid ground. So in the spiritual sense, what is a disease? God will arouse his people. If other means fail, heresies will come in among them, which will sift them, separating the chaff from the wheat. The Lord calls upon all who believe his word to awake out of sleep. Precious light has come, appropriate for this time. It is Bible truth showing the perils that are right upon us. Heresies. If other means fail, heresies will come in. These are the sharks. That's where we're at. To me, this is a sign that everything else has failed. God's been waiting for his people for a long, long time to get their act together. It hasn't happened to his satisfaction, and here we are. This is what God does when all else fails. What do people do when all else fails? Well, on a good day, they read the directions, right? When everything else fails, read the directions. I'd like to point out some of the things that I think are the directions that maybe we haven't paid too much attention to. There's more of a connection than might be apparent at first. I believe this is the only effective response, the only effective plan of counterattack, if you wish, okay? We will, I believe, be traveling up a narrow trail that gets narrower and narrower and narrower. And eventually, the only thing that we can do, well, we have two options. We can fall off the cliff, or we can do what God's been asking us to do all along. Because he's only asked us to do that which is absolutely necessary in the first place. From a historical perspective, Adventist history, And for reasons far too many to fully cover in the time I have today, I believe we can best see the underlying issue in this statement. The truth for this time, the third angel's message, is to be proclaimed with a loud voice, meaning with increasing power as we approach the great final test. This test must come to the churches in connection with the true ... Okay? The great final test. This is the time of the Omega, right? The Omega is the end of the alphabet. Great final test. It's final, right? It's the end of the school term or whatever, right? It's a final, right? This test must come to the churches in connection with the true what? I heard it. Most people might think Sabbath. But that's not what the prophet says here. The true medical missionary work. A work that has the great physician to dictate and preside in all it comprehends. As it turns out, pantheism is only one element of the whole alpha to omega train of heresy. Pantheism is the theoretical, theological component. But that's not all there is to life. That's not all there is to godliness. There's theory. That's what the Jews fell into, thinking that a mental assent to the truth would save them. We are warned against that time after time after time in the writings of the Spirit of Prophecy. That contest, the church won back with Kellogg in 1905, 1907, 03 to 07 type of thing, okay? We won that battle. We preserved our theology. And that was good. We needed to do that. But we lost some things. Kellogg had been used of God. Ellen White says things about Kellogg she says about nobody else. She says he was the greatest physician in the world. She calls him God's physician. She spent more time and effort trying to save his soul than any other person. Dr. Kellogg had been used by God to bring the practical work of Isaiah 58 to the church's attention. Isaiah 58. Now, that's a nice chapter, but is it really important? I'll let you decide. We cannot keep the Sabbath. You'll notice that's in brackets. In the original, it says this day, but the paragraph before is talking about the Sabbath. We cannot keep the Sabbath holy unless we serve the Lord in the manner brought to view in the Scripture. Is not this the fast that I have chosen, to loose the bands of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, let the oppressed go free, and that you break every yoke? Is it not to deal your bread to the hungry, that you bring the poor, or cast out your house, when you see the naked, that you cover him, and when you hide not yourself from your own flesh? Isaiah 58. This is the work that rests upon every soul who accepts the service of Christ. We have not done that. I want to tell you, she wrote, that when the gospel ministers and the medical missionary workers are not united, there is placed on our churches the worst evil that can be placed there. The gospel workers and the medical missionary workers pretty much lost their unity with the Kellogg situation over 100 years ago. The worst evil on the churches is the lifeboat that we have been floating in. Now we have sharks to deal with. The only way we're going to effectively respond to this is doing what God asked us to do in terms of uniting practical ministry with true theology and evangelism. Now, I'll tell you what's hard about that. Uniting practical ministry with our theology and our evangelism just really grates on selfish hearts. Because practical ministry is always self-sacrificing, and it hurts. But without it, or as clanging brass and tinkling cymbals. In other words, we need to do the same kind of work Jesus did when he was here. Where are we headed with all this? 2 warnings from a century ago give us the clearest picture. She says, as religious aggression subverts the liberties of our nation, religious aggression subverts the liberties of our nations. Did you read in the news in this last week of the mayor of Houston subpoenaing the sermons of the ministers in the city? Yes. Any minister that addressed the issue of homosexual rights in a sermon, his sermon has been subpoenaed. They backed off from that some, but they're simply narrowing the boundaries of what they're after. They've not given up on the right to subpoena sermons. But it's interesting. There was a big hubbub about it, and there are a lot of people very upset. So I'm not saying it's going to happen right away, but it's moving that direction. As religious aggression subverts the liberties of our nation, those who would stand for freedom of conscience will be placed in unfavorable positions. For their own sake, they should, while they have opportunity, do something intelligent. What would be the intelligent thing to do? As religious aggression subverts our liberties, what should we be doing? The statement goes on. They should become intelligent in regard to disease, its causes, prevention, and cure. All those who do this will find a field of labor anywhere. There will be suffering ones, plenty of them. Can you spell Ebola? Who will need help, not only among those of our own faith, but largely among those who know not the truth. You know, there's a reason Ellen White constantly encouraged learning simple remedies. You know why I think that is? Because some of us are just simple people. You know? We're not all cut out to be MDs. You know? It's good. I probably shouldn't be practicing open heart surgery. It'd be so much fun, but I'm not sure it would be a good thing. Okay? It's probably not my department. But simple remedies have one really, really cool thing. They're simple. And I think the day is going to come when simple may be all we have to work with. This is the ground on which the final battles of evangelistic effort will be fought out. Circumstances will, I think, perhaps very soon, dictate that any religious system that fails to address the practical needs of humanity will simply be irrelevant. When everything goes to pot, when the finances collapse, when the government collapses, when the society collapses, when the medical system collapses, you're not going to have the liberty of preaching something that doesn't strike a need. Jesus spent more time healing than he did preaching in his day. I suspect there's a key in that. Whether God's church understands this or not, Satan does. Here's our second warning. I think I heard someone reading this already. The enemy of souls has sought to bring in the supposition that a great reformation was to take place among Seventh-day Adventists, and that this reformation would consist in giving up the doctrines which stand as the pillars of our faith and engaging in a process of reorganization. Were this reformation to take place, what would result? The principles of truth that God in his wisdom has given to the remnant church would be discarded. Our religion would be changed. The fundamental principles that have sustained the work for the last 50 years would be accounted as error. A new organization would be established. Books of a new order would be written. A system of intellectual philosophy would be introduced. The founders of the system would go into the cities and do a wonderful work. The Sabbath, of course, would be lightly regarded, as also the God who created it. Nothing would be allowed to stand in the way of the new movement. The leaders would teach that virtue is better than vice. But God being removed, they would place their dependence on human power, which, without God, is worthless. Their foundation would be built on the sand, and storm and tempest would sweep away the structure. Is there anything like that happening today? Have you ever heard of the social gospel? Have you ever heard of the Adventist Peace Fellowship? It's an organization. It's actually about, 10 years old, give or take. If you look at those who have signed they have on their webpage, they have a whole place where those who sign on who agree. We have many of the same individuals that we have been seeing in other topics. I just pulled some screenshots from their webpage. It's kind of interesting here. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to read all this. Down in the bottom left of the picture, you'll see there, it says peacemaking and reconciliation. Well, that seems like a good thing. You know, it's seriously hard to propose that dead people in bombed out buildings is better than peace, right? So the idea of promoting peacemaking, that seems like a good thing. Reconciliation, that's good. We're happy with that. This one talks about caring for creation. Well, yeah, ecology. Good. This one is health and human rights. Well, it's hard to imagine anything like healthcare becoming a problem. And human rights, That's got to be good. This one is freedom of conscience. Freedom of conscience is good too. Not sure why we had to illustrate it with a Buddhist monk, but freedom of conscience is good. Racial and gender equality. Yes? How could you go wrong with equality? It sounds fair. And this one, Sabbath economics. Oh, Sabbath economics. That's kind of interesting. Well, Seventh-day Adventists are, big fans of the Sabbath. But what if peacemaking goes forward on the wrong terms? Or ecology turns into pantheism? Or healthcare includes radical positions on abortion, and human rights starts classifying the truth as hate speech? That's a big issue in the country in which I'm currently living. They've got some very, very strong hate speech laws in Canada, and there are things that one ought not to say. Freedom of conscience sometimes can be twisted around to promoting a full moral equivalency between all systems of belief. I believe in freedom of conscience. That means that what you believe is as good as what I believe. Really? Gender equality sometimes can begin to impact theology. And what if Sabbath economics turns out to not really have anything to do with the Sabbath? Let's go back and look more closely at Ellen White's statement on this, the Reformation that Kellogg wanted to bring about 100 years ago. The founders of this system would go into the cities and do a wonderful work. Kellogg had the Chicago City Mission. He was doing a completely disproportionate, mixed-up version of medical missionary work. He started off, Ellen White supported him very strongly from his conversion in 1888 at the Minneapolis Conference. That's where he was converted. I think somebody mentioned that already. Up through 1891, 93, she supported him very strongly. About 96, he got fed up because the ministers were giving him so much grief. Ellen White says they made war on him. And he got mad. She says he put on the coat of irritation and began to criticize the ministry back. But when he was good, he was good. When he was bad, he was bad. She's writing this at the time when he'd already lost his way in regard to the medical missionary work and was doing a lot of things that the Lord had said not to do, right? Okay. Leaders would teach that virtue is better than vice, but God being removed, they would place their dependence on human power, which without God is worthless. Their foundation will be built on sandstorm and tempest would sweep away the structure. This statement is playing out in Adventism right before our eyes. Way too many church members are heading down the pointless social gospel road. There is a foolish approach to medical missionary work that accomplishes nothing for the Lord. That's not what the Lord is promoting. Okay? I don't mean to put too much emphasis on the Adventist Peace Fellowship. Incidentally, the Adventist Peace Fellowship is a member of a sisterhood of peace fellowships, which includes the Baptist Peace Fellowship and the Catholic Peace Fellowship and the Buddhist Peace Fellowship. It seems kind of ecumenical, actually. That particular organization may or may not end up doing anything big. But the mindset is deadly, and the mindset is becoming widespread. The bad news is that I don't think we'll be getting rid of this problem anytime soon. Look at these words. Foundation, built on the sand. Storm and tempest would sweep away the structure. This is the story of the wise man and the foolish man. One built on the rock, the other the sand, and then the rain came down and the floods came up. Two houses, one storm, the same storm. Christ didn't say anything about one house looking different than the other. They were houses. A guy built a house, another guy built a house. The houses could have been identical for all we know, except for one thing. They had a different foundation. That's the only difference, the foundation. The wise man's house was not protected from that storm. The same wording is used. It's the same storm. There's no favoritism involved here. It's that one house was solid and one house wasn't. What is the storm and tempest? When is this going to happen? I believe, brothers and sisters, we call this the little time of trouble. When the world falls apart, when God's people find out what it's really like to have every earthly support cut off. Remember that statement? Every earthly support cut off. What a terrible thing. Wrong. Why do we need earthly support today? The road gets narrower till we finally do what we're supposed to. We don't need earthly support today. We have the Lord. But we have not learned that. I have not learned that lesson. God is merciful. But when it happens, when the world falls apart, when God's people find out what it's really like to have every earthly support cut off, when it becomes impossible for selfish people to carry on a wonderful work in the cities without giving up their selfishness, then you will see the difference between a system that depends on human power, which is worthless, and a system that depends on God to provide what is needed to carry on right doing by faith. This is the application side of righteousness by faith. Righteousness by faith was never meant to be only theoretical. And at least from the Lord's perspective, all this, I believe, is coming soon to a world near you. I wish to tell you that soon there will be no work done in ministerial lines but medical missionary work. Oh, no! What a terrible thing. We're losing all these different avenues of soul saving. Wrong. That's what we're supposed to be doing now. We're always supposed to be doing medical mission work because that's what Jesus did. He was the great medical missionary. He spent more time healing than he did preaching. The work of a minister is to minister. Our ministers are to work on the gospel plan of ministering. Oh, let me think. What would that be? Oh, maybe that's something to do with Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Maybe I should look and see what Jesus did. Maybe I should look and see what he told his disciples to do. Go out and preach and teach and heal. They were always to be combined. What is the matter, she asks. The ministers are hovering over the churches, which know the truth, while thousands are perishing out of Christ. If the proper instruction were given, if the proper methods were followed, every church member would do his work as a member of the body. He would do Christian missionary work. It is easy for us to blame leaders. It gets a little closer when we say, how much have I done in the last month? How much have I done for my neighbors in the last month? How much have I done for the guys I work with in the last month? How much have I done in the last year? I can tell you, I have not done enough to prevent myself being ashamed when I think of those questions. And without pointing any fingers, I'm guessing that may be true of most of us here today. We are in no position to get on a high horse and blame everybody else. The statement goes on. But the churches are dying, and they want a minister to preach to them. They should be taught to bring a faithful tithe to God, that he may strengthen and bless them. They should be brought into working order, that the breath of God may come to them. They should be taught that unless they can stand alone without a minister, they need to be converted anew and baptized anew. The churches, the Adventist churches, do you need somebody to spoon feed you every day, every week? You need to be baptized anew. The medical missionary work can be done very, very poorly. Dr. Kellogg already demonstrated that for us. But the medical missionary work is God's chosen means of manifesting the truth of the gospel. There is going to be no replacement for it. To try and say we're going to preach our way to the kingdom will never work. There is a demonstration which needs to be made, and God's people can only make this through self-sacrificing labor and love. And what we're going to see, I believe, is the false religions of the world coming together, uniting to take care of their own. And there will be this false emphasis on humanitarian service. There will be a false medical missionary work. And frankly, I think they're going to be miles ahead of us, because the children of darkness are wiser in their generation than the children of light. But God's people will catch up. Prophecy says so. I depend on that. God's people will catch up. And eventually, there'll be two horses in this race, pulling forward, going forward, and eventually the time will come when it's impossible to serve anymore. Those who have selfishness still at their hearts, they've dismissed God. They're depending on human power, which is worthless. It will come to a point where pure, simple selfishness says, I ain't doing that anymore. It's hard. I'm not going to do that. I quit. And God's people are going to be at the same point where their lives, anybody can look at it and say, you can't keep on loving people. The world is falling apart. This is a dog-eat-dog place. It's every man for himself. You can't keep serving other people. They don't have the resources. They can't keep themselves alive. And you know what? They do it anyway, because God said to do it. Righteousness by faith and nothing but faith. That's a demonstration that needs to be made. There's a dual demonstration there. Number one, there's an incredible demonstration of love going forward. Serving people, but no one else well. And secondly, there's the recognition. Anybody who's looking at the situation can easily see that there's no way they can keep doing this. There's no way they can stay alive and do what they're doing. But God is providing, like Elijah with the ravens. And then witnessing becomes a very simple thing. Brother, you could live like I'm living if you want to. It's easy. God provides. It's right here in the Bible. Let me show you. Now, with all this, yes, we're teaching the Sabbath. Yes, we're teaching the 2,300 days. Yes, we're teaching the spirit of prophecy and the state of the dead and the second coming and the sanctuary. We're teaching all that. This is nothing. Nothing here is to say, oh, let's stop teaching the doctrines. That's the social gospel side. That's not where we're going. I've got some statements, which are not showing up right now, but they'll be here shortly, that say exactly that. With the presentation of the truth, we must mingle compassion and mercy. We must mingle all these other things. Search heaven and earth, and there is no truth revealed more powerful than that which is made manifest in works of mercy to those who need our sympathy and aid. This is the truth as it is in Jesus. When those who profess the name of Christ shall practice the principles of the golden rule, the same power will attend the gospel as in apostolic times. There is no truth more powerful than medical missionary work. Next thing, Isaiah 58, and you just look at the words at the bottom there. Love revealed for suffering humanity gives significance and power to the truth. We are dealing with serious issues. I recommend these books. They're wonderful books. I recommend this book, the book by Howard Peth. That's a pretty good book. It's a wonderful book, actually. I got into the act. I wrote a book. It's not even bad. I'd recommend that one too. But beyond learning the problems, learn the solutions. And if I may be so bold, I believe it was providence. The Lord worked it out before I wrote this. And the only reason I got involved in that and writing that is because I'd previously written a book that deals with all the solutions. I had not made the connection in my mind. I had no idea that I would ever be preaching about this in regard to the omega of apostasy. But the sozo is the word that means both spiritual salvation and physical healing. They are never to be separated. Please study into that issue. Thank you for your patience. God bless you each.